Hi, my name is Michael Rhodes, and today I'm talking about obligations. And most obligations are emotional obligations. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you who are watching me or listening to me now are parents. And have you noticed when a child is born, at the same birth comes out an emotional obligation? And yet somehow, for many people, there's no realization that that emotional obligation has been born. And so we begin to raise the child, and we do everything that we feel we should do. And there comes a time when the child is not a child, but an adult. But the same emotional obligation is running. It hasn't grown weaker. If anything, has grown stronger. And one day, these children who are now adults have got their own children. And you begin to realize that you feel very, very obligated to your children still. This strong obligation. But what is the obligation? I mean, is it that you've got to look after them? Well, you've done that as a child. You kept them from danger. You did all you could with them to help them to become good adults. And yet that emotional obligation is still there. And one day, let's say one of them falls out with you, because this is such a common scenario. And it doesn't matter who's at fault, because really fault's nothing to do with it. And so you fall out with this person. And now what's happened to your emotional obligation? Now you feel, quite often as a parent, you are wrong, and you feel obligated that you should heal the distancing between you, to heal the row or the argument or whatever's going on. You feel it's an obligation that you've got to do this. Not everybody feels this, but a lot of parents do. And so when you reach this point, the emotional obligation, it's a good idea to realize I am not obligated anymore. This is an adult. This person is creating their own life. This person has been deliberately unpleasant to me because I may have a belief system that they don't agree with. They're being very unpleasant to me. It's a good idea to let go of that emotional obligation, because you're not obligated. You have an emotional obligation that has become a very, very strong emotional attachment where you feel obliged because they're your child. If it was anybody else treating you that way, you'd have less problem with it. But one of your own children. And realize that although they are your biological children, they are not yours. You and I, we do not own our children. We own the right to help them to become the best adults possible. But we do not own the right to then tell them how they should live their lives, how they should run their emotions, or anything like that at all. We can say to them, I think this direction you're going is not a good one for you. And if they look at you and smile and say, but this is the direction I'm going, you let go. Or if they snarl at you angrily, well, this is how I am, you let go. This is how they are. So maybe the way you reared them wasn't exactly how, they didn't come out exactly the way you might have expected. Or if you look at yourself, you might find that you also snarl at people under pressure. And so when you look at your children, remember also that you're looking at a lot of yourself in this. There are a lot of characteristics of you there. They're not going to be a carbon copy, and if you've done a remarkably good job, they will be very different from you, even if they have facial characteristics and slight personality quirks that are similar. The more different they are from you, the better job you've done. And it's always somewhere in this growing up, we need to let go of our emotional obligation to them. Because these are independent souls. They've come through us. And we have had thousands of lifetimes. We've been married or had thousands of different spouses. We've had hundreds and maybe thousands of different children. And we've maybe taken turns. Who's the parent, who's the child in many incarnations. And so let go of that idea that these children are yours, because they're not yours. They came through you and they have their life to live. And if you're able to do that and let go that you know how they should live their life, and let go of the idea that because you're the oldest you know more, once you can let go of those things, you'll find A, the inner peace you have, and B, if you can let go of the emotional obligations. A lot of people have friends. Most people have friends. And many people feel an emotional obligation to their friend. And so, for instance, a friend comes along, you're just going out, and it's quite an important thing you want to do. And they say, oh, I just called in for a cup of coffee. What do you feel? Honest to yourself? Well, I'm just going out now, but I'd love to have a coffee with you later. Or do you feel a strong obligation that you've got to sit and have coffee with them and put your plans on hold? Now, this is when you find out about your own self-worth. Because if you could smile at them and say, I had plans, I wish you'd rung, I could have changed it, but I am going out, but please come along later and we'll have that cup of coffee. I look forward to it. Or are you going to put your own plans on hold and have a cup of coffee because you feel an emotional obligation? And so many people will feel that emotional obligation and not be true to themselves, which does not honour you, and therefore it doesn't honour your friend. If you have a friendship that cannot stand honesty, you do not have a friendship. That's not what a friendship is. A friendship is where each person can look the other in the eye and smile and be honest. And if emotional obligations get in the way of that honesty, then we have trouble. I have an older brother, and he and I don't see eye to eye on much. I love him. And I suspect that he loves me. And that's one thing we see eye to eye on, although we express our love completely differently. I'm an affectionate type. He doesn't really like affection, especially from a male, because that's the way he has grown up and developed. And that's okay. But I'm completely honest with him. And he is inclined to go into long discussions, which means I sit and listen and he talks. And sometimes at the beginning, I really don't feel like sitting there for a long lecture. And so I just get up and walk out. And I'm quite sure sometimes he's a bit hurt. But I'm being true to myself and I'm being true to him. And at another stage, I'll sit there and he goes into one of his lengthy discourses, and I will listen to him because I have the time and I'm prepared to do that. And so we have a very nice relationship, a good relationship, because we're honest with each other. He tells me what he thinks, I tell him what I think. Neither of us tells each other in a way to be cruel or unkind. And all this works. So we can disagree with each other. We can go past the emotional obligations that we've got to make our friend happy all the time. So let's bring this to relationships. Do you feel you have an emotional obligation toward your wife or your husband? Of course you do. Of course you do. I've been there and done that. But the truth is, we do not have an emotional obligation. When we are living our life in a way that our partner emotionally approves of us, then when we lose that partner, we'll find that we're not being honest to ourselves. We have not been honest to ourselves for a long while. We've been trying to live in a way that meets their emotional approval. And if it meets their emotional approval, they're not going to tell you off. There's going to be more peace. But that is peace at a price. Definitely peace at a price. And there's not a price you should pay. But if you bring kindness into the equation, and you can say to your husband or wife, look, the way you're talking to me right now, I really don't like that. I really do not like that. And so if you could be kind to me, I would be kind to you. Let's be kind to each other instead of talking down to each other or growling at each other or shouting at each other. Let's be much more kind to each other. And we're then being more kind and true to ourselves. Some couples couldn't do that. They don't have the emotional maturity to do that, but many can do that. And when I've advised this at various times to various couples, they've done it and said, wow, just bringing kindness into the equation is so good. And in the many ways, kindness has an emotional attachment. You know, we feel good when we're kind to people and they're kind to us. It makes us feel emotionally good about ourselves. We like that. And that's wonderful. It works. And this is what life is so much about. If something doesn't work because of emotional obligations and emotional attachments and emotional concepts with each other, then we should put it aside. We need to respect our emotions. We are an emotional species, and a time will come when our emotions will be our whole language, and there'll be very little spoken, because emotions are a far more powerful language on many levels of consciousness than our words. But we haven't got there yet. And so if our words are kind to each other, do you realize that your emotions become kind to yourself? Many people beat themselves up emotionally. They don't need anybody else to help, which is really, when you consider it, is ridiculous. And so much of this begins with emotional obligations. Obligations to friends, obligations to family, obligations to husband or wife or parents. One of the most tricky ones of all this, and the most difficult to deal with, your parents are now elderly. And what are you going to do? Put them in a home and disown them? I tell you what, a lot of families do that. That to me is utterly disgusting, but it happens. And so, what happens? Are you going to look after them? Many do this purely out of emotional obligation and dislike every moment of it. That is inclined to bring you into another incarnation where you'll face the same scenario. Doing something you don't like to do because you feel an emotional obligation. If you feel love for your parent, which would be rather nice, if you feel love for your parent, then there's no emotional obligation. You're happy to look after them because they looked after you and now you're looking after them. And for many people there's a joy in this. There's a satisfaction in it. There's a pleasure in it, even if it's inconvenient. And so I don't tell you how this works, but I will put into it, be true to yourself. But if, for instance, looking after somebody you think you've loved and who has loved you as best they can, and at the end of their life, nearly at the end of the life, you're ready to push them away, just be aware of what goes around comes around. And this is a reflection, if you're pushing them away, of your lack of love for yourself, your inability to fully embrace yourself, your emotional disparity with yourself. And there's no rights or wrongs or any of this, but find an honest and kind and as much as possible loving approach, and you'll go through this without any pain or suffering. And to add to this equation, it's always a good idea when you're in any doubt of anything to consciously choose love.